Thank you. It gives me great pleasure to welcome our speakers this afternoon. We have the same format as we had in the previous session. We have an interview with an artist for the first session and then a talk by a curator for the second session. And we're going to stick to time again. Thank you very much. And I want to introduce Pablo León de la Barra, who is the who is going to be in interview with Felipe Ehrenberg in a minute. Pablo has a PhD from the Architectural Association in London. He is a curator, independent researcher, writer, and as many of you will already know, has done a huge amount of work on the Pinta show, so you can go and look at his work here. Felipe was born in Mexico City, but in parallel with David Lamelas, he also spent some time in the UK in the early 70s. He founded the Beaugest Press, and worked with all sorts of different, mainly Fluxus sort of artists. Last year he did a performance at Essex, an extraordinary performance which was commissioned by the university, called Shokoyotsin, the penultimate, which was a very memorable occasion indeed. So it gives me great pleasure to welcome our first speakers this afternoon. Thank you.
The microphones, they stay like this, or we need, do you hear us?
I think all you have to do is this.
Okay, so this is mine then. So, well, I'm very happy to have these two lovely ladies to my side. First, Valerie was my external examiner when my PhD, so it's good to have her back. And Catherine, she's always been an example for me, and the job she's been doing here, that she'll talk about it later, has always been inspirational. I knew about Felipe even before he knew about me. I was in primary school. I had a classmate called Andrea Ehrenberg, who was a very good friend of mine. Her father, Pedro, was almost like a father for me. And then I remember sometime in 1982, we were driving down the street with my parents coming from the suburb, very classical family, very traditional family. And there was this walls painted saying Ehrenberg candidato, Ehrenberg. So that was my first knowledge of Felipe. Yeah, vote for Felipe, vote for the one with the mustache, vote por el del bigote. So I was, oh my God, it must be a relative of my classmate Andrea. And then I learned that Felipe was the black sheep of the family, that he had lived in England, excelled himself in England. He was a socialist candidate, a socialist political candidate, a real candidate. And it was not until 1994, when I went to X Teresa, that I first saw Felipe live. And he was doing a performance. I don't know if you remember that performance, Felipe, in which you had a can of graffiti paint, and you were like doing fire.
I do.
Throwing.
Oh, here we have some.
Then, so it was my first live encounter with Felipe's work, and that's when I started to get more into the work. In 2002, Felipe was consul of cultural attaché of Mexico in Sao Paulo. And I was invited to an exhibition project there with Catherine David, and he was responsible of inviting me, of paying my ticket. So in a way, Felipe was responsible of my own tropicalization. So I'm always very thankful. He made me go back in 2005, go to Brasilia to do a project there. So I'm always very thankful, and I'm always very happy to see him. Felipe lived here from London from 68 to 74. So maybe we'll talk a little bit about those works. We have some images here that could serve as a backdrop, but you can talk about the works that you prefer. There's two very good interviews on his work that you can find in the internet. One is with Sanal Gilbert, and the other one is by Valerie and Michael Asbury, that maybe is around here. And they touch many of these themes. They talk about the Beaugest Press. They talk about the date, a Tate with a Fate, where Felipe tries to get into the Tate with a pillow on his head and only one hole for his eye, and tries to go inside as a work of art. And so maybe we can talk about the other works that are not mentioned that much in...
Yeah. I also want to thank the two girls here next to me. But this is an all-girl public almost. There's 4 boys, I think, 1, 2, 3. This is really a feminine evening, for which we should be thankful. And I really am very glad also at sitting next to Pablo, because passing the staff from one generation to the other is also one of the greatest pleasures of growing older. And these are good people. His is a good generation, and I'm very glad of his tropicalization also. Tropos, after all, means change. So there we have it. So go ahead. Oh, well, one of the things that I wanted to very specifically say, I wasn't a socialist candidate. I was an uncomfortable candidate for the socialists, which is very different. So having cleared that up, we can get into those answering questions and answers later on. But my slogan was "Vote Bigote," which is vote for the mustache, and that I thought was the deepest and most open campaign slogan I could have had.
So maybe we'll start quickly with this work from '72, and I'm interested that it's your dactylar mark, but it has also a sign of a cut.
Yeah.
And I'm interested in the idea of the cut and the exile. There's a text by Sueli Roldick, who I also met thanks to you in Brazil, where she talks about being exiled in Paris with the dictatorships in Brazil, and how she couldn't find her voice, how she was going to psychoanalysis with Deleuze and Guattari, and Guattari told her this thing about finding her own voice, and it was only 6 years later when she could sing again a Brazilian song that she recovered her voice, and she knew she was ready to go back to Brazil, that the wounds had healed. So this is why I wanted to start with this image of
leaving your homeland unexpectedly is always quite a shock. At that time, England did not extend asylum. They allowed us in, my children, their mother and myself, they allowed us in under attenuating circumstances, which is a strange but very nice euphemism. And we had to report to the police for about a year every week. And after that, we were allowed to stay here. And for that I will thank the United Kingdom for all my life. Now I am a self-described or a proclaimed expatriate. There's a difference between being an exile and an expatriate. An exile, the country rejects you. An expatriate, you reject the country. So there's a nice difference there. So I'm an expatriate in Brazil for the last 10 years. But moving, especially when you have little kids and you have to get used to new circumstances, and the little kids are all brown-skinned and they're mistreated because of that and so on and so forth, are harrowing experiences. And I, in fact, respond to things without thinking. I think an artist generally works that way. When I cut my finger and decided to print it, the actual process of printing it until it healed, until the wound healed, and I had my fingerprint back, which is unique, was a healing process, a tiny but very important healing process, and which gave me a way to look at possible moves in life later on. Since then, I haven't been afraid to move. But that was a very unexpected self-healing mechanism that I used at that time. Time does heal all wounds, almost.
So, for those that don't know, Beogés Press was the press that Felipe founded in Devon and that published lots of artist material. This is a date of Fate with a Tate with Felipe with a pillow hole in the whole text is in the booth, in the Barra booth, so you can also see a lot of these words and the documentation there. And this is it's backwards, but it's a stroll in July, and it's part of the walks that you were doing in the 70s in London. So I guess it was part of trying to find where you were, or how?
Well, I don't think I've ever really delved too much into why I do the things. They come out. I very often wondered why they weren't liked by people. I mean, this is not art. What's this, a map? What are you doing? All that sort of questions that went on for about 30 years and people never bought anything, now are being answered. People are getting interested in that. But I wondered why they weren't liked. At times I try to do more aesthetic things, but I've rarely made any sort of concessions. I just poured them out. What I did do, and this works very well in Portuguese, I'm a general practitioner, which is I'm not a painter, I'm not a sculptor, I'm all of those things. And as a general practitioner, who I don't know whether they exist anymore in medicine, but it's one of the best things a family could have, a general practitioner who will attend to the kids as well as to the grandparents, to belly aches, as to broken bones, and actually to giving birth. So a general practitioner, I think, is a much more practical human being right now than a specialized person. And that's one of the things that I always try to do as far as being an artist. I don't think I've ever thought of why I was an artist or what art did for me. What I was always trying to do is to see how I could make myself useful through my art to whoever, was around me. That's really the point, the whole thing.
And you thought of this walk, it was a walk that started around Angel and went down central London, crossed
It's a long
Green
walk.
Park, Hyde Park, all the way to Paddington. And you thought of it's a walk as a sculpture, no? Or?
Well, as a definition, I felt that I needed to redefine art. At a certain moment in my early life, I thought that the definitions weren't... I had one of the advantages. I was trained as an artist in the old-fashioned way. I didn't go to art school. I went to art studios, and I worked with important artists, important in my life. Matias Geritz was one of them. Jose Chavez Morado was another one. Feliciano Bejar. And so I worked with them, and I learned their tricks of the trade, and of course of the profession of. So these academic definitions, which I see are imprinted in the DNA of young artists as they come out of school, they're so marked by definitions. At that time, I felt that things had to be refined, redefined. If mental effort is followed by a physical effort, if an idea is followed by a physical effort to create a form, a sculpture, then a walk could be that. Because you have the idea of a genesis, and there's this whole physical effort, and if you trace it on a map, you have a form. So there has to be a sculpture. Extending definitions for me has always been very, very important. I think I'm actually, if people ask me what sort of an artist I am, I look at systems. I like to see systems and see if they have loopholes or if I can use a system in a different way. That's why the postal system, the transport system, the art systems, all of those systems came under scrutiny. When the disposal system broke down, it became a point of interest for me for the rubbish walks.
So this is La Poubelle. It's a documentary that you can see at the Tate website. If you put Felipe Ehrenberg Tate, you can see the whole 15-minute documentary where Felipe was tracing the growth of the trash in the strike of the garbage collectors. So it was kind of a self-generating sculpture that he was documenting and he was filming.
I worked with Richard Crichet at that time at the Slade. I met him at the Slade. He is now an important Austrian media artist. And we started talking and taping our talks, which is, I think, one of the first times that I remember or I become aware of having to save ideas, store them somehow differently than just store ideas. Now documenting is very important, but we were already storing, and I kept all those tapes, which were used for the garbage walk. But amongst those things, two things came out. One was that as the rubbish piles grew, you were actually able to look at them as aesthetic objects. They had an aesthetic capacity. And the other, of course, was the system breaking down. And so they had, and the third, packaging. These rubbish piles mainly were packaging. And then at that time, our talks already talked about the packaging of art. Art was starting to be packaged at that time. Jack Wendler, by the way, was the first gallery I ever became aware of. I don't know whether he still exists or he's alive or not, but he opened the first gallery to sell non-saleable art that I remember here in London. Anybody you heard of Jack Wendler? Does he still exist? Is he still alive? Oh, okay. Really? Okay. Oh, I see.
So we have 5 minutes left. There's the work, two, three. The work of the tube announced, where you go to the tube that we won't talk about it, and we'll just press the Flux show. And here's I would like to end with this, and it says, "Cuando vivo hago política." So when I live, I do politics. And I think it's interesting that also, like, I mean, you were doing those works in which you were pioneer, but I'm also interested in this other side of your work, and it has to do when you go back to Mexico, and it's one being a political candidate, but also the works you were doing in the neighborhood of Tepito, so working in a kind of with the popular classes, and this is in the 70s, and I want to say it also because many people think that Mexican contemporary art started in 94 with Melanie Smith and Francis Alice going to Mexico and discovering the popular and the city. So I think it's important to also trace a historiography of this and this previous history of what was happening and how you were relating one to politics, because there's many artists now working with politics, but sometimes I think that it's politics as a simulacrum, or politics within the art space of the museum, and you were really doing it outside, and other working with the people of the neighborhood of Tepito, which was a very working class, rough neighborhood, and doing graffiti and
well, that was after the earthquake, and that was very important because art was just the oil to oil the machinery. In fact, the work after the earthquake in Tepito lasted for 13 years, which is a very, very deep and long involvement. This one was the first time that the Communist Party was legally accepted, and once they were legally accepted, they fell apart, and there was a coalition of socialists, and somehow or other they picked me out of somewhere. I don't know why they asked me to be a candidate. I said, yes, but I'm an anarcho-syndicalist. They say, that's okay, that's not to worry. Well, that broke down. That actually became a debate between the Dinos and Renos, the dinosaurs and the renovators, which of course broke the whole party up completely. It broke it up. The point, what I'm trying to say is, I'm not an activist artist. I'm not a political activist. I'm a citizen before and anybody's a citizen before you're a doctor or engineer or an artist. And I've always felt that artists, the sensation that artists seem to project is that they're way above or beyond the realm of ordinary humans. And I was never way above and beyond. I had to pay bills and go to the bathroom and, buy a car and take care of kids. So I think those are all branches of art. But you cannot and should not be classified as a social activist or just an artist, period.
So I think with this we end. We run out of time. I mean, I guess the only thing I would like to say is that it's interesting that while in London you were doing the Beaux Press, which was working as an art press, but also was giving a community service. People would go there and print their stuff. And which maybe that in a way linked you to when you went later to Nicaragua in '79 after the revolution and set up printing presses there and working with people doing murals.
You want to steal another 20 minutes?
Yeah. So well, that gives us lots of other material. I also read that that he did a mural in a Mexican restaurant in '71, which I'm curious about.
Here,
yeah, in London. We should need to go and try to find.
That's a long story, but I picked up on it.
Okay,
I just picked up on it. Yes, I did a mural.
Okay, so next. Thank you very much. Thank you, Felipe.
Speaker of the programme this afternoon, Catherine Lampert, who is an independent curator, as I'm sure many of you know, and an art historian. She worked for many years at the Hayward Gallery and then at the Whitechapel, where she organised a series of very memorable exhibitions, including two that stick out in my mind, particularly the Alfredo Ja and the Francisco Toledo exhibitions. I should say that this had also been planned as an interview with Melanie Smith, but then rather short notice, Melanie was whisked off to the Venice Biennale. I'm sure Catherine doesn't mind me saying we're very pleased to have her here anyway. And so thank you very much indeed, Catherine, for being here.
Thank you, Valerie. I wouldn't have minded if they wanted to go on for 20 minutes. That would have been fine with me. But I wouldn't have accepted the switch in the program if I had felt that I was just talking about the period 1988, 2001, when I was director of the Whitechapel, because if that had been the end of my Latin American involvement with specific artists, I would sort of feel that was no point in going back to the past. But in fact, I'm very much involved with 2 or 3 of the artists who I showed at the Whitechapel, and others too, in making books and future shows. I begin with this image of the Signals Gallery. There was a terrific book which was done a few years ago on the occasion of the Odesika show at Tate Modern, which is about Odesika in London, and it shows people we all probably recognize: Camargo on the left, Guy Brett, Paul Keeler, Guy's the young chap with his pullover, and Christopher Walker, David Medalla, and Gustav Metzger. And of course, the Signals Gallery has become sort of infamous, and it was definitely the reason why the first Whitechapel show, which was before my time, 1969, the Odesika show happened, because the gallery closed quickly, and Guy made an arrangement with first Brian Robinson and then Mark Glazebrook to bring the show to the Whitechapel. But of course, Isobel Whitelegg, who spoke earlier and wrote an essay about Signals in this Odesika in London book, it's a very good account, and she says that Signals, quite rightly, had set itself to develop an ability to accommodate flexibly the contradiction and paradox embodied by the art of its time, and to meet that art on its own mutually transformative terms. And I think that's right. But I also will point out that it's completely right, that it wasn't quite, in retrospect, and this is a problem with Latin American and any kind of art which involves participation and performance, everybody's memories are a little bit different. And there's a great excerpt from a letter that Lydia Clark writes to Odesika in a couple months after the show, or a year after the show, when she says, each new thing they see, she's talking about other artists and curators, they say they've already done it, but they don't have any photographs or documentation. It makes one suspicious, don't you think? And she's actually talking about David Medalla, and she's everything gets smoothed out with posterity, but that's the way she felt at the time. Odesika himself, this is the Whitechapel on the left, and I moved to the East End in 1971 when I left university. And the Whitechapel area was really scruffy then. There was Itchy Park on the other side of Whitechapel High Street. The gallery was in a sort of in-between time with very little funds. Odesika notices that the billiard room, which was in sort of a space that doesn't exist now, it's the sort of loading bay, the workshop, it's not a gallery space, was what attracted the special public. He said people already knew the rules of the game. They kept on their shoes. In general, they were people in whom I have a great deal of interest, the London marginalia of Whitechapel, a pretty tough bunch. Some of them came early and stayed until closing time. Truth be told, when I become an old geezer, I hope to have a pool hall somewhere in Rio. And I think it's right to remember this show, not as a kind of mainstream show. Indeed, not the kind of show that you could put on at Tate Modern, or indeed, in a minute, I'll show you at the Barbican, because people were supposed to roll around in the straw. They took off their shoes in one portion. These are the notes for Tropicalia, which was the area which was covered by sand. And, the critics sniffed at it. One said it was lotus land in East London, infertile and unnecessary. And so when it's remade, as it was at the Barbican, it certainly gets sanitized, and it's for toddlers, it's for people to take off their shoes and amuse themselves for a few hours. And of course, it's fresher and brighter. So I agree with Dawn that Latin American neo-concrete art concretism, and that period is a fertile area for collecting. But I think there's always going to be a part which can't be remade, and that's particularly the performance part. And I'll come back. Oh, sorry. I'll come back to that in a second. What have I done? Pressed the wrong button. Just go back and get rid of it. The Whitechapel's program is this in brief in this particular period. And of course, there's a Whitechapel in 2001 when it was our centenary. There was a special book done where we commissioned essays by Guy Brett on the Odesika show and Mark Francis on the Frida Kahlo and Tina Modotti show. So that's a good reference for what really happened in those cases. And then the program I began was with Tunga in 1989 in the small gallery. And this is the program in its sort of essence. I'm not going to speak about each one of them. The Tunga show was in what was then called the New Gallery, because it was only 3 years after the Whitechapel reopened when it was modernized and expanded. And this is a bit what Dawn was talking about. You can never in installation shots get a feeling of what it really looked like. This was his piece called Lizard. But these informal snapshots that I have in my sort of, I don't know, shoebox give some idea of what it looked like when it was being shown, and when he had the two girls with their hair connected, the twin girls, one of his unpronounceable, I still can't pronounce it, Epophagus capillary Siamese, one of his performance works, which of course was extremely annoying to Sean Scully, who was the artist in the upstairs and lower gallery. Just to quickly mention, this is Tunga's another instance. This is a piece called Egyptia in the Phoenix in the upper left gallery, which he did with Shayla Wakely, who died in March, who was a great recorder of Tunga's work and other Latin American artists' work in her videos, and a participant in this particular piece. And on the right is something that happened that I don't think any of the curators who came with to the Sao Paulo Biennale in 2005 saw, because they came with their bus and their patrons and their strict program. And this happened about 11 p.m. when the music and the atmosphere really developed. And a work of his called Elective Affinities, which is also shown in his Rio space, really had things happening that, again, as I say, don't happen when it's under the sort of monitoring of modern museums who are worried, for instance, about Odesika and the obvious association of Cosmo Coca and his drug habit, his small flat in New York, his apartment, and many other things that just don't work. This is a piece which Tanya Bruguera, who was in the Cuban art show at the Whitechapel, did at Innova in 1996, the year after she was at the Whitechapel. We don't have any records. I don't have any records of the piece she did at the Royal London Hospital for the Whitechapel. But in St. Pancras, she was recreating Ana Mendietta's work. She had a 10-year project which ended in 86 to 96. And controversy sort of ballooned when the estate of Ana Mendieta opposed her, what was called Tribute to Ana Mendieta, which was recuperating her works. And so Tanya herself stopped the series in 96 and destroyed most of the documentation. And indeed, she was about to be destroyed. It was at the St. Pancras Church, and only a few people realized that her body was catching fire, and about half an hour later she was rushed to the University College Hospital with very severe burns. So this is a work that is also a performance piece. This is just a slide to put in of Guillermo Cuica, I think a very outstanding artist whose Burning Beds, a small display of Burning Beds, is on at Tate Modern now. But some of his works, like this Coming Home painting on the left, I think are very poignant and very, very political in a very low P way. works, which are probably underestimated in the story of the European and North American story of Latin American art. Alfredo Jar, which Valerie mentioned, was an exhibition which was partly his light boxes, but also which were about the mine in Brazil, which is the one on the right, and Lagos and Vietnam, the boat people. But it was also one of the failures of the Whitechapel, one of the great failures, because we asked him, and he co-opted Gayatri Spivak to do a work which was about the local area, the Bangladeshi population who lived around the Brick Lane area. And he did it partly from a distance, and he asked us to procure, Paul Bonaventura, to procure images of young Bangladeshi girls. And in the end, we used images of girls who were at Mulberry School. And when Gayatri Spivak and Alfredo had words which were said by a sweatshop owner, very derogatory words about the local Bangladeshis, that they have big families and they work for £20 a day and things like that. When they were put on top of these images, the girls naturally at the opening of the show were really upset and felt that they didn't understand the irony, didn't care about the irony, and felt that they were being exploited. And Alfredo met with them, spent several hours, decided to remake his work, take off the words, put them on the wall. Whitechapel funded that very happily, and it was a good example of an artist who isn't rigid in how they foresee their work, but makes a truly local piece in the end. In 1990, end of 1995, Alejandro La Paz asked Andrew Dempsey, who was mentioned before, how to get people interested in contemporary and Mexican art. She was the cultural representative at the time in London, and Andrew, a little bit naughtily, said, "Why don't you send Catherine Lampert?" By this time, I was his girlfriend, to Mexico, and she can do whatever she wants. Said Alejandro, "Fine, I'll arrange for her to do that." And Dawn Ades suggested that I meet with Cuauhtemoc Medina, who was living around very locally to us in Hackney, and he would tell me who to go see. And he certainly did that. And he gave me an introduction to Curare, which was the organization of artists and curators that Olivier Dubois and others were running, along with Cuauhtemoc, who's in the right-hand corner. And as a result, I met a lot of artists who I've kept in touch with, maybe a dozen of them. I saw one, Thomas Glassford, at the Whitechapel a few weeks ago. And I asked Francis Ellis to show at Whitechapel straight away from meeting him in his studio. And he showed 60 of the Fabiola works, which were sort of tacked to the wall of this same new gallery, and now have become a sort of, they're on a world tour, these works from the flea market of the Saint Fabiola, and now there are more than 300. He also took me I went to Oaxaca to see a show he had there, which had been organized by Laureana Toledo, and went to some of the workshops where he was making the collector images, and also indeed the piece called The Liar, which is of course the sign painters, the rotalistas, copying his image in their own styles. And I think it's, that certainly his introduction and his friends, I agree it's the Mexican art, which was from the city and from the workshops, isn't the only thing in Mexico by any means, but it certainly had its relevance to London. And very quickly, yeah. Okay, there are about 4 slides. One thing he did was propose that I meet Francisco Toledo, because several of his generation saw Toledo's intervention in his own region, the Yucatan region, as a kind of exemplar for their return to their living in the Centro Histórico of Mexico. And we had a Toledo show. There was a group of photographs by Graciela Iturbide in one of the galleries here, Rafael Ortiz, which are certainly worth seeing, like the image of Toledo there. And these were some of the works which was in the Whitechapel show in the year 2000. He also was recovering woodcuts, prints, other things, and putting them sometimes with a rather pop twist, as his son, Dr. Lacre, has done subsequently. And I think I'll just finish with this image of the artist who suddenly becomes very acclaimed internationally, like Alice. You can see little subscription. His galleries: Yvonne Lambert, Listen Gallery, Peter Klickman, and he's this picture is called The Prompter, El Soplon, and it's Francis sort of seeing this kind of exploding international reputation and trying to make an inventory of what he does, just like Peter Doig did when he arrived in Trinidad in 2002. A new Latin American artist, Doig.
Thank you very much indeed, Catherine.